this morning, President Trump says phase 2 of the ceasefire in Gaza is underway, but phase 1 is not yet complete, with Hamas failing to release 24 of 28 bodies of hostages. So how will phase 2 get underway, and what will happen in a mostly destroyed Gaza in the meantime? Joining me now, retired Colonel Cedric Leighton, our CNN military analyst, and CNN Global Affairs analyst Kim Dozier. Thank you both for being here this morning. First to you, Kim. I mean, hasn't Hamas already broken the ceasefire deal, because all of the hostages, alive or dead, were supposed to be handed over around the same time? Could this threaten the ceasefire?
Well, Hamas had always warned that it might take more than 72 hours to find all of the bodies, in some cases because they weren't held by Hamas, in other cases because the Hamas groups that were holding them, the individual units, might have gotten killed by Israeli airstrikes, and Hamas has lost contact with them. And also remember, right before the ceasefire, Hamas was under attack, so it couldn't be in constant contact with all of its different elements. Now that the Israelis aren't monitoring all the communications for targeting, they are reaching out and trying to find the different units and locate all of the bodies. But it's going to take time.
Let me ask you, Colonel Leighton, President Trump had mentioned that they had approved Hamas as a police force for now in Gaza. And since then, Hamas has carried out executions of people that opposed it or that it claims were collaborating with Israel in some way. What does this tell you about whether Hamas will actually disarm?
Yes, Sarah, I don't think they're going to disarm, at least not voluntarily. So this is going to be a major sticking point, I think, for this peace process going forward. Hamas, has been able to exercise power in the areas that it controls right now. And that fact is, I think, going to play a large role in how this goes forward, because once Hamas exercises that control, they're not going to relinquish it. They'll be basically reestablishing themselves where they were in terms of their police powers, their governmental powers, and things like that. So if they're in charge of the civil administration, that's going to make a huge difference in terms of being able to carry out the provisions of this peace proposal.
Yeah, Kim, I want to stop for a second and let you hear what President Trump said about Gaza and rebuilding on Air Force One.
I'm talking about something very much different. We're talking about rebuilding Gaza. I'm not talking about single state or double state or two state. We're talking about the rebuilding of Gaza. A lot of people like the one state solution. Some people like the two state solutions. We'll have to see. I haven't commented on that.
It's very different from the policies of the United States because the two-state solution has always been the desire. What do you make of this, and what does it mean for phase 2 of the ceasefire?
Well, to look at the larger Palestinian state issue, if President Trump wants to move ahead with the expansion of the Abraham Accords, Saudi Arabia and other Gulf nations have said they won't support expansion unless Israel commits to a two-state solution. So there's that. Eventually, they will change the channel on President Trump's thinking on that. But for now, the problem is that rebuilding in Gaza will only really be possible in the 50% plus areas that the IDF controls. I can't see other nations who've committed forces for peacekeeping, like Indonesia has suggested that they might be willing, would be willing to put their people on the Hamas-controlled side and possibly have to clash directly with Hamas to take control. That means all the investment will go to the part where the IDF is in control, and possibly people will start coming to those areas. We're going to have a very confused and messy picture for some time to come, no matter what sort of promissory note got signed in Sharm el-Sheikh by all those leaders.
Yeah, Colonel Leighton, I was going to ask you about the securing Gaza now. Making it possible for there to be some movement towards rebuilding when about 70%, it's estimated, of the buildings, we're talking mostly homes, businesses, but also hospitals, schools, have been destroyed.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Sarah. UN is saying that that's the case, and some estimates are even higher than that in terms of the amount of destruction. But it's huge, the amount of destruction, regardless of which estimate you use. So that's going to complicate things. The basic thing that you have to do is you have to bring in all these forces. If you're going to have a peacekeeping force, as Kim mentioned, Indonesia is probably one of the major players in this particular aspect of it, along with several of the Arab nations. That is going to be very difficult to insert them between the IDF lines as they exist right now and the areas that are controlled basically by Hamas. So that's, I think, one of the most difficult things, both logistically and operationally, that we're going to see. And if that's the case, then this peace process, the rebuilding, which really amounts to the rebuilding process, is going to have some major stumbling blocks associated with it, because if you don't have the security, you can't rebuild. That's basically the bottom line here.
Yeah, phase two is the most critical thing going forward, but also the most complicated. Colonel Cedric Leighton, thank you so much to you, and Kimberly Dozier as well.
Well, joining me now live from Beirut is Paul Salem. He is a current senior fellow as well as a former president and CEO of the Middle East Institute. Appreciate you being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So after watching the emotional return home of all 20 living hostages, the signing of the ceasefire agreement and the release of nearly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners, President Trump says phase two of his peace plan has now begun. How hard will this next phase be, given it will require the disarming of Hamas and the implementation of Gaza's security and governance?
Well, first of all, what has happened is tremendously important, as your reporting indicated. The return of these hostages, the release of prisoners from the Palestinian side really underlines, hopefully, the end of the most intense conflict that we've seen over the last 2 years. And the return of these hostages and prisoners for their families and loved ones is a tremendous achievement. I think President Trump deserves a lot of credit for that, as well as the Arab mediators that put a lot of pressure on Hamas as well. But indeed, the second step or the second phase of this agreement, I think will be much more difficult to implement. On the Hamas side, as mentioned, they have not agreed to disarm. They don't want to deal themselves out of the Palestinian future, neither politically nor militarily. They have given up the hostages, and that means they've given up a lot of leverage. But they can also hope that maybe Israeli assaults on them will be less severe now that the hostages have been released. On the Israeli side, the Netanyahu government and his right-wing allies, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, all of them, I think, are not enthusiastic of bringing back another Palestinian authority of some kind into Gaza. That would limit their ability to operate in Gaza. They don't trust Hamas. They will leverage the fact that Hamas is not disarming in order not to give concessions on their side. And they are certainly not enthusiastic about bringing other armies, whether Arab armies or European armies, into Gaza. That would also limit their ability to move forward. So I think it's really President Trump's insistence, which is going to be critical. Will he be able to maintain his pressure and his focus, as well as other regional players?
So where does all this leave a two-state solution, given Benjamin Netanyahu has rejected it and President Trump sidestepped the issue when asked about it before heading back to Washington, saying we'll just have to see what happens if the US president refuses to commit to a Palestinian state in the end?
Well, I think it's very clear that the current Israeli government, much of Israeli public opinion, the current Knesset, has pretty much ruled out a two-state solution for now. Prime Minister Netanyahu is facing a challenging political year. There will be elections for the Knesset sometime, either in November of next year or before that. So he's going to be very focused on his own short-term political survival. And given public opinion in Israel today, that will have to include not going towards talks towards a new two-state solution. That's why I think he and his government will be doing all they can to drag their feet on that issue. And I don't think U.S. pressure will be able to force Israel to go in that direction. But I think the two-state solution, at the end of the day, maybe it's a difficult solution, it's complex, Its conditions don't seem to be there today, but there is no better solution. There's no other solution. But I think it will require the emergence of a new leadership in Israel. The Arab world is completely for it, ready to engage in all ways. The Palestinian Authority has been trying for it for decades. So I think it will require change in Israel, continued pressure from the United States in order to get there.